It is Ryan here, and I have a question for you. What do you do when you win? Like, are you a fist pumper, a woo-hooer, a hand clapper, a high fiver? I kind of like the high five, but if you want to hone in on those winning moves, check out Chumba Casino. At ChumbaCasino.com, choose from hundreds of social casino-style games for your chance to redeem serious cash prizes. There are new game releases weekly, plus free daily bonuses. So don't wait. Start having the most fun ever at ChumbaCasino.com.
No purchase necessary. VGW Group. Void where prohibited by law. See terms and conditions. 18+.
Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the Motor Minds podcast. I'm your host, Patrick McCoy, a.k.a. Cruiser Pat, and we're going to be leaning on the Cruiser Pat aspect a little bit today because the person we're talking to is Mr. Chris, a.k.a. Charlie Don't Dance Tango. Chris, how you doing, man?
Doing well. How are you?
I'm good, man. I'm good. This is one that I've been excited for since before I started the podcast. You know, you and I got to chit-chatting and getting to know each other on Instagram, honestly. I tried to scroll back in our Instagram messages, and it didn't even go back far enough for us to tell. But
in years, I think. Yeah. And it's been on the mud forum before that.
Exactly. So we've been talking for at least 3 or 4 years now since I've owned my cruiser. And honestly, we've become really good friends just via social media and I Hate Mud Land Cruiser forum, but it's funny how it's evolved.
Cars. That's how it goes, you know.
Exactly. And luck be have it. I mean, you were able to come down to Texas and visit your old boy down here. We got to meet in person for the first time after 3 years of chatting on the internet and sending car memes and stuff back and forth, but finally got to meet in person a month or two ago. So
got to experience that Texas hospitality.
Oh, yeah. Absolutely. Boss Cat Kitchen in the Woodlands, Texas. What's up? Great place. But yeah, man, I'm happy to have you here. And like I said, this is one that I've been looking forward to for a long time. And you know, so you're a Land Cruiser guy, but after getting to know you a lot more, you're a lot more than just a Land Cruiser guy, is what your Instagram handle would say. But you know, you've been into a lot of different things, Audis and Volkswagens and Porsches and all that kind of stuff. So what made you get the bug, man? What led you into the world of cars?
It's funny. I was thinking about this in preparation for our chat here, and I found all kinds of old pictures of me, even from when I was real young, playing with toys, I even had one of those little electric ones you plug in right around, of course. So
right.
That was I think that was the first Porsche, right? It was like a plug in thing, right? So the irony, we're coming full circle on that. Eventually my next one could be a plug-in as well, right?
Right.
It started with a little electric 911 there, but yeah, very funny. I mean, I think overall cars have been in my family, and the obsession really with cars has probably been there a couple generations at least. My grandfather, came back from fighting in Korea and opened a mechanic shop and was, fixing up and selling cars that go out to the auction and bring back a car. And my mom would be driving one, my aunt would be driving one, my uncle would be driving one. It was kind of like this. You can imagine like a procession of them,
right?
In Connecticut. So it's a very fun hobby, as you well know. I think over time, I tried a lot of different things. Sampled widely. I think that's a topic we'll come back to. I very much believe in this idea of sampling widely and trying as many things as you can.
Right.
But after trying a whole bunch of stuff and factoring in our New England winters, which are pretty challenging at times, I ended up with Land Cruiser, and it's been absolutely phenomenal, as you well know, right? So years later, here I am with this same car. I've owned this 2015 Land Cruiser longer than certainly longer than any other car I've had, and have put on now, just over 100,000 miles on it, and it's been phenomenal, right? Problem free. All over the U.S., as you know, we've talked about that at some point, I'm sure too. But really, really phenomenal car.
Oh, absolutely! It's funny. I remember. So we've been talking about this for 3 years, just on Land Cruisers, and that's gotten us into different things. But the one time you were driving from Connecticut to, I think, Colorado or something like that, and you text me like, "Oh man, gotta check engine light," and then like before I could respond, you're like, "Oh, it just went away." Yeah, I was like, "Oh, that's the beauty." That's the beauty of Land Cruisers.
After 100,000 miles and whatever that is, 8 years or something, that is the most trouble I've had with that car.
I love it.
I think it's a very good chance it was just some bad gas somewhere on the way into Denver. But yeah, it's crazy. I mean, I think in the last I guess the first real road trip would have been early 2021.
Mm-hmm.
Then I think I've done now probably 30 or 40,000 miles or something of US road trips, which is kind of fun, you know. And so, like, as a reminder for those listening, it's, you know, 3 or 4,000 miles across the US. So 30 or 40,000 is like, it's just a lot of back roads, a lot of scenic stops, right? But that first one was really informative. I think you and I have certainly touched on it, but for those that are less aware of the backstory, like, I, at some point, probably again as a result of COVID, realized there's a lot of world to see out there. I've been stuck in my home, like, you know, many people had. And I got this trusty Toyota sitting there that seems up to the task.
Right.
So some light modification, I hit the road, right?
Yep.
And got all the way out started in Boston and snaked my way through, stopped along the way in Colorado and in Utah, and then went up the coast, ultimately ended up in Northern Oregon and ultimately Washington State before coming back. And it was just an absolutely phenomenal trip, even in the freezing cold of winter. I think I left from Boston around middle of February or something, and it might have been the winter of all of our polar vortexes. So
right.
Really cold. And I kept thinking in my mind, like, if this thing performs anything like these old Volkswagens, I could be dead out here. You know, I hope it just keeps running, you know, and it did, of course. So
right. No, it's awesome. And it's funny because that's one of the things that, you know, I can't remember our first conversation, but when we first started talking, one of the big things was like, yo, this dude actually uses his cruiser, and like more than anybody that I really know in the 200 series platform, maybe outside of Lee.
We got to give a shout out to at some point. Yeah. I mean, so for the actual off-roading, right, I'm sure there are plenty of people that are banging those more often than I am. For the long distance, like, kind of, unfortunately, we have to use the overland term, right? I think it is
right.
It's vehicle-based travel, and at least for me, it's been all domestic as of now, anyway. But yeah, I don't see a ton of other people that are driving across the U.S. as often as I am, but it is just such a fantastic platform for that.
Oh yeah. And that's the thing, you know, whenever we first started talking, and we started talking because of the modifications, honestly, you know, we both have a cruiser, but we start talking, oh, what did you do here? What did you do there? Does this work? Does this not work? Hey, man, don't buy this. Please, dear God, don't buy this. This is awful, or whatever it may be. And our cruisers were almost twins there for probably a year with the ARB front bumper and the Slee sliders and old man emu suspension, all that kind of stuff. But you're one of those people that I kind of lean to whenever I'm like, what do I need to do next? And what options do I have? Like, I chose my suspension solely because of you. And you were like, yeah, I've got the BP51s.
Yeah,
I know, right? you were like, yeah, I put like 20,000 miles on them, no problems. And then also cruiser Kurt Williams of Cruiser Outfitters, he was like, yeah, this is the only options that I use. And so, like, if these two people are saying it, then obviously I'm going to use that same stuff as well. So, and it hasn't steered me wrong since. But yeah, I mean, so talk a little bit about your rig. What all do you have done to it? What's the goal of it? Why do you like it? All that kind of stuff.
Kind of to use the phrase we use sometime in the tech space, it's the definition of scope creep, right? Where a really good idea of what we were starting with, we set out on a project, and then as time went on, it just keeps evolving, right? It's kind of one of those runaway projects. So you'll have to bear with me on that front, but to some extent it started as this idea of, you know, I want to keep it, I mean, at least in the beginning, it's going to sound funny now, but in the beginning, keep it somewhat simple, right? I want to keep it somewhat lightweight. And so the real stuff to start had been sliders and skids, both from Slee there in Golden, Colorado. Shout out to them. I think the products are absolutely phenomenal.
They are. I also like them.
Eventually I ended up adding some drawers and an ARB, so ARB drawers and an ARB fridge in the back, and around the same time realized like it'd probably be worth upgrading the suspension, right? We're adding a ton of weight here in the back. The handling is definitely going to be affected by this. So decided to go with the BP51s, as we said, and I think that was largely it for the first round of stuff. I mean, I guess I should add that it did have a snorkel from pretty early on, which was kind of but at this point now, given everything else that's been added, it kind of blends in.
The snorkel is one of those things where people either love it or they hate it. And I knew as soon as I bought a Land Cruiser, I was like, I'm putting a damn snorkel on this thing. Like, I have always, from the time I was a kid, I was like, I want a snorkel on something.
I think you and I have probably talked about that. When I bought the car originally, in my mind, I was saying, I got to get 5 years of use out of this thing as a daily driver, as a commuter car, as just a reliable Toyota before I start hacking it up. And the day came when it came time to punch some holes in the A-pillar to put on a snorkel. And I was like, there's no turning back now.
Yeah, exactly. You broke the seal, go all the way.
From that point, it was all downhill, as they say. But yeah, so that was largely how that was set up for the first road trip there. And the goal was to see a bunch of these beautiful places that I hadn't been to, right? So I had traveled a lot for work, had been to, the general Denver area, I'd been to the Salt Lake area, I'd been out to California, but, there were all kinds of things, as you well know, in those states in particular that are absolutely beautiful and are not in the downtown area. Surprise, surprise. Right. So, the things that I had circled on the map the first go around, it was, Rocky Mountain National Park. It was everything really in the Moab area in Utah. There were all kinds of other things in southern Utah I wanted to see. And just, connecting. The goal the entire time was to connect with family and friends along the way, spend time in person with people that I really enjoy spending time with, of course, get out into nature. And then it's also an outlet for me to practice my photography, which I love. So I'm very much an amateur, right? I carry my camera with me pretty much everywhere I go. But
if you look at his Instagram, and I please urge everybody to go check out Charlie Don't Dance Tango on Instagram. His photography he says he's an amateur. This is pro level photography. And that's one of the reasons, again, I started chatting with him, was like, I also like photography, but more of an amateur than this guy. And they're beautiful. I have a few prints of them at my house, and they're just awesome things. But he puts the Land Cruiser in like the perfect light, and it's just a thing of glory. But and it's cool to see how you've used, I hate the word overlanding, for kind of an outlet for all of these different things. And of course your Instagram grew really quickly, because I feel like a lot of people could relate and really wanted to do what you were doing. But talk a little bit about what drove you, and I know it was the pandemic, but what drove you to want to start traveling so much by car? Of course, you traveled places before, but taking a cruiser out to different places across the US is not an easy or short thing to do.
No, and so it's funny because I'm thinking back now, the longest that I had driven was probably 6 hours or something before I had ever taken off on that trip, right? So it was like a couple 100 miles, maybe down to Washington, D.C. or something, starting in Boston and going down to D.C. And so that would have been a decent, day's drive, obviously, right? And the amount of days now that I've driven 400 plus miles and thought nothing of it is fascinating, right? So like when I set off, I really had no idea what I was getting into. And there's an element of that where it's, the surprise of it or the unknown is intriguing, and it definitely was. But, I was fortunate to grow up traveling pretty frequently to Europe to visit family over there. My dad moved to the US from Denmark. So we were always spending time over there, either for the holidays or for a summer break or something. And suddenly then, having the pandemic dropped on all of us, right? Where I'm working from home now. There's no commute. There's very little socialization. I realized that I not only needed to see some of my friends that I, had been quite distant from, but just the urge to get out and explore, really. So the U.S. was such a fascinating place. I think we've touched on this too in our prior conversations, but it's so incredibly diverse, both in terms of the people and the places and the cuisines and the nature and all the rest. And it's sad, I think, that most of us are under the impression that, like, well, I live in the U.S., so like I've seen the U.S. and it's only worth traveling internationally. I just don't agree with that, And I think to some extent I was a little bit indoctrinated in that idea because, we spent so much time, for instance, in Europe, visiting family and friends and all the rest, that you kind of had this sense of when there was a big holiday or something, you packed your bags and you got on a plane. But in reality, there's so much to see. And even within no matter where you live in the US, like, pick a local park, pick some forest that you haven't explored, go walk along the water somewhere. It could be the ocean or a lake or it's a river or stream. There's so much to see.
Absolutely. And it's interesting, I totally agree with you. And that's one thing. I do have a huge desire to go outside of the US, but one of the things that gets me a lot is there's so many, and especially with social media, and you get to see what everybody else is doing and whatnot. It's a blessing and a curse, but there's so many things in the United States that people don't even know about that you can get to by car Whether it's a lifted Land Cruiser or it's a Camry, like you can get to some really cool places in the United States that are right essentially in your backyard that don't require you to have a visa to go over there.
Yep.
So
true. The other thing to remember is, like, I think you and I get stuck in the trap, as do many Land Cruiser owners, that you have to build these things in order to go somewhere. Yeah. It's as you said, it's not just like you can take a Camry there. Half of these things, regardless of which car you take, you're still parking somewhere and walking to see what you want to see.
Absolutely. And
don't let the gear get in the way of getting outside,
Right. And that's the thing too, is all modern body on frame 4x4s, right? They can do like 95% of the trails in the United States. And most of the trails where there's beautiful things on the other end of them, whether it be, Black Bear Pass or something like that in Colorado or Moab and stuff like that, a lot of that can be done with a stock vehicle. You don't have to modify it and do all of that, but that lends its ear to the other thing of, once you get the bug for modifying and messing with your vehicle and making it your own, that's the thing for me. Like, yes, do I love being able to look at a rock and being like, yeah, I could drive over that shit. Oh yeah. But like, I love that part, but also it's the tinkering aspect. It's okay, it's a little bit loud, so I'm going to quiet it down by using sound deadening, or, I really like the way this looks, but what if I did this to it? And that kind of aspect to it. So have you always been into, even before overlanding, have you always been into car modification and whatnot, making it your own?
Had so many projects that have been so preposterous. I mean, I think probably like 2 or 3 of the ones that stick out. I had a really unusual Volkswagen Touareg way back in the day. So I had one of those V10 TDI Touaregs, which, again, like, I think it was constantly rated as one of the least environmentally friendly vehicles ever made,
and probably least reliable, but that's another story.
It wasn't spectacularly reliable. No,
yeah.
This is not one of those cars that I would have got in on a whim and driven across the country, but it was such a fascinating vehicle. And I think it's the classic sort of Volkswagen problem of the idea behind the engineering is so compelling,
right,
but it just might not be feasible for the real world,
Right.
And so this had this absolutely fascinating diesel engine, adjustable air ride suspension. There were all of these, very, very unique components for a vehicle that I think it was a 2006, the one that I had. Yeah. But I went through the work of importing a bunch of, front and rear valences from Europe to make the thing look like an R50. I don't know if you know the R50.
Of course.
So that came out as a 2008 model, but all of the components for the bumpers and stuff were interchangeable. So I imported a bunch of those. Actually was able to source some, I think it was called engine turn aluminum trim for the interior. So prying out all the wood and putting in this beautiful aluminum stuff that looked like literally straight out of a Bentley or something, right?
Oh my gosh.
So completely ridiculous project. And had I known how unreliable it would be, I would have never done anything. Right? Because it's like, I think that's part of the other appeal of a Land Cruiser is that you can feel confident in knowing that when you modify this thing, I'm still going to have it 5 years from now or 10 years from now.
Right. It's not disposable. They're not made to be disposable, right? It's the classic Toyota builds it to a 25-year standard instead of 10 kind of thing. But
so I learned my lesson on that one, unfortunately, and got burned not only on the depreciation, but on the sale. And it's just a total disaster from an investment. It was very good fun, right? But cannot advise that anyone follow in that.
And honestly, you're one of like 3 people in the United States to say, yeah, I owned a V10 Touareg from the mid 2000s. It was
such a cool car. It was such a cool car. I mean, one of the other ones that comes to mind as just a genuinely preposterous project was I had an Audi RS5 not long after that was also like a brilliant car, right? Like the engine, super high revving V8, very fast shift dual clutch, transmission. And I was able to source these very hard to get European spec Recaros from a buyer on Craigslist. The only problem was he was in Denver and I was in Boston, and he would not ship them.
Right? I honestly don't blame him.
Nope, I get it, right? But I had looked these things up and I wanted to import them. And I was on German eBay all the time trying to do Google Translate to figure out what these things were. And these were so unbelievably cheap that I was like, it is going to still be a better time and, better investment for me to fly to Denver to meet him in a parking lot with a cousin and a friend.
Oh my gosh.
These things bubble wrapped and then shipped. It was completely insane. Right. But so I have had, the point is plenty of projects, right, beyond this Land Cruiser. And I think it's this idea of it being sort of a permanent thing as we talked about, that has allowed me to just take this runaway project and not feel too badly about it, you know?
Right. That's the thing, is it for me too, you kind of hit the nail on the head. I don't have the extensive car history that you've had, but like even the Jeep that I had prior to this, like, whenever you first buy a vehicle, you're like, oh, I love this so much, I'm never going to sell it. But like once it got to 50,000 miles and blew a thermostat and I was stranded on the side of I-59 in Houston, it's like, yeah, this thing ain't going to stay around for that long, So, but the Land Cruiser, like mine's about to tick over 100,000 miles, and I have one incident with it, which was previous owner's fault, but that's a story for a different day. But besides that, like it's deadbolt reliable. It rides as smooth as the day I got it. And like I go under there like once a month to make sure that everything is good. And it's like, hey, yep, still looks the same. It's pretty good.
Yeah.
And that
it's true. It's so unusual from my experience, right? And I had so many of those problem cars that I guess almost anything would seem reliable now, but it is really a joy to own. But I mean, that first round of modifications was good and bad, right? It was the gateway to my then going further and further down this rabbit hole. But I think when you're building, I imagine it feels a little bit like building a track car or something where it has a purpose. Mm-hmm. And so you get some time out, the equivalent for us, I guess, is you get some time out on the road, you get some time spent on trails, you get some time spent camping, and you realize, okay, I can make this slight adjustment over here, or I could, probably make this tweak on this thing and ultimately have a lot better time out there on the next go around.
Right.
And that's kind of been the iterative process for the last, I guess 2+ years on the Land Cruiser. So it started out as relatively lightweight. Unfortunately, it's not lightweight anymore.
No, that's an 8,500 pound vehicle going down the road, no matter which way you cut it.
It's not, well, so if it's fully loaded, yeah, it's not exactly a featherweight. But again, I think as far as these vehicles are concerned, it's one of the few cars that I would feel confident in knowing that all the components are built to handle the weight. The only thing I would say at this point that is still an open question for me is if there's some sort of big brake kit or something in the future to offset that weight. I think the engine is totally fine, totally capable of handling it. Mine has actually been re-geared as well, so that goes a long way towards helping to offset the weight and everything, particularly in the mountains. But some brakes, I think, could be in order in the future. Yeah.
We'll have a conversation offline about that, because I was just looking at not Power Stop, but a different big brake company but we'll talk about that offline. But it's interesting that you say that. I mean, it's always evolving and always changing. And I think me and you right now are kind of at the same points with our builds where we're like, it works really well. I kind of want to stop messing with it because I don't want to have to work my way backwards to this point, because ride's 100%. Quiet, it's 100%. Reliable, it does well.
I'm where I need to be with this. I mean, so after that first trip, I came back and started planning for another round of modifications. Surprise. And I actually ended up taking the rooftop tent route, which I got to say was not originally in the plan at all.
Right.
I think it was a realization. I work with this really great shop here in the Boston area that, they have all the most spectacular products that you would have never heard of otherwise, right? I think the average person before the days of Instagram and social media and the rest probably wasn't actively shopping for parts from Australia or South Africa.
No.
But when you get some time to actually see these designs and these products and these things in action, which I would always encourage people to, try and find these things before you spend a bunch of your hard-earned money on it.
$2,000 on a tent that you're going to use 3 times a year.
Right. And those criticisms are 100% valid, right? I think the average person thinks they need those in order to spend time outside. That's not true, right? I think, but as you spend more and more time out, in the woods or on the road or wherever else, those little things that seem like ridiculous luxuries become so spectacular as far as the convenience of, quick and easy setup and tear down and all the rest. So,
I
did end up adding this Alucab tent and awning, which at the time just seemed completely preposterous, but has got a ton of use. And I've been so thankful to have it on so many occasions. Particularly the awning, actually. I mean, the tent is incredibly well made, but the idea that you can have this, awning with no, uprights, no supports, whatever that need to be placed down makes setup so quick. And it's been a breeze. But so that one got added, I think probably maybe spring because it would have been spring in 2021 when I got back from that trip. And from there, I was sure, and this is the best part about these adventures, obviously, is like, I'm 100% sure my project is done.
Yeah.
Lo and behold, I was completely wrong. So that summer, I ended up getting snuck us off the wait list ultimately to get into the LCDC trip. I think you and I have touched on that previously, but
definitely.
Those that are not as familiar, there's this group that puts together trips. I think it's every year, ultimately,
every year,
for Land Cruiser owners, that is typically rotating between either, Southern Colorado or even potentially Moab occasionally, I think. But great group, predominantly, I think maybe broken between 100 and 200 series Land Cruisers, different groups, but ton of time off road, and anyone can join really that has one of these vehicles. We had a couple folks that were joining that actually didn't have a Land Cruiser at all, but were there as prior owners or whatever else. And but so we were, we in this case, my girlfriend and I were lucky to join that, and we did a bunch of the very easy trails because again, it was wasn't heavily modified. There were plenty of folks that were all armored up, which is what the Land Cruiser looks like now, but that wasn't us then, right? So we were trying to avoid too much damage. But that again, that was probably my first time interacting or spending a bunch of sort of quality time with the folks at SLE. And that was phenomenal, right? Like I got a chance to see these products in action. Again, I got a chance to see, what it's really like to spend quality time for tens of hours off road in some very challenging environments.
Right.
So that was when I started planning with them to get back out and do the round of installation that I did last year, which included the front and rear bumpers and all the rest. So it's very much a completed Land Cruiser, as you and I joke. I mean, I've always liked the idea of having larger tires or all the rest, but for all intents and purposes, it is done, as we said.
for now. That's awesome. But I love it. And, of course, the subject of the podcast, cars and mental health, I know in talking to you previously and whenever we met in person, a month or two ago, I found out that you have this like mega interesting story that kind of intertwines with cars, but just, goes to show the kind of person that you are today. I mean, you want to talk a little bit about, what cars does for you and like how it intertwines with your mental health and maybe your background a little bit?
Yeah, I think so. One thing that's probably important to set the stage on is that, obviously everyone's journey is different. We all arrive to, our various outcomes in very different ways usually. But
absolutely,
for me, my journey with health and mental health started fairly early, and it was a very sort of scary outcome, obviously, and could have ended up much worse. But I feel very fortunate every day. It's a great reminder of things can often be worse. But I had a near-death traumatic brain injury as a kid. So I was 3 years old. I fell on a playground. I was medevaced into the city, emergency surgery for 8 or 10 hours, 40 or 50 stitches. My parents are getting told that, your son is very likely not going to survive this. If he does, he's certainly not going to walk or talk again. You're going to have to make a lot of adjustments, right?
Yeah.
I've often tried to put myself in my parents' position there, receiving that, that feedback from a doctor. That was on my 3rd birthday, just for context. So only a couple hours earlier, we're blowing out candles. There's kids over with cake, and I would have had a headstone that, to the day was exactly 3 years, right?
Right. And I have a 3-year-old boy at home, and that hits home for me. That is,
it's very
heavy.
It is. And the next morning, it's challenging not to believe in some higher power, right? When things like this end up as well as they have, right? But the next morning, I'm yanking on my breathing tube, asking when I can go home, complaining about whatever I'm missing that day, probably some Legos or something that I wanted to be playing with, right? And I just got so lucky. And so there were all kinds of adjustments that needed to be made to my lifestyle then, right? And I still to this day have had major changes, but there's no bone really left on the right side of my skull. There's a big metal plate in there, right?
Oh my goodness.
At 3 though, there was some hope that the bone would grow back because I was so young. And so they didn't immediately go for that surgery, but they said, your son will wear a padded helmet, right? And we'll monitor the results frequently. And so you can imagine as a 3-year-old suddenly being, very active and, outdoors and all the rest, suddenly to be kind of kept inside and full time wearing a padded rugby style helmet.
Yeah,
that's very different from one day to the next.
Oh, absolutely. Trying to tell my son to sit down like at the dinner table for longer than 5 minutes, let alone telling him he can't go outside. It's such a fascinating thing to have
literally flip a switch from one day to the next and have that be your reality. But the net effect is that I spent a ton of time alone. Spent a ton of time playing with Legos, doing the indoor activities where a lot of it was, kind of creative puzzles or problem solving or whatever else. So those are things I love to do to this day. But it did change, my childhood, I think. And it did force you to have some realization in the future of like, how has this altered my life, kind of permanently. One of the main things is that unfortunately, like I suffer from ongoing migraines. That one is, I'm happy that that's the main problem, right? If you consider how it could have turned out, right? But I did unfortunately also have a kind of a scare in college where I, wake up on the floor in the computer lab. I've been working on a group project with my classmates, and I have no idea how I got there. And the EMTs are standing over me and they're asking me if I know where I am and what day it is and what my name is even. And I learned pretty quickly that I had apparently had a significant seizure. And the answer was I didn't know where I was and I didn't know what day it was. And I knew my first name, but not my last name.
That's scary. Oh my goodness.
That's another great wake up call that, it turns out you're not actually immortal, right? Mr.
Right.
Tango does have an Achilles heel. You just have to take care of yourself. And so that was a great reminder, in my, I guess it would have been early 20s then, right? That, sleep is really important. Diet and exercise are really important, not overindulging in any one thing, whether it's, alcohol or anything else, really important. Right. Finding a way to introduce balance wherever possible, it just pays dividends in the long run. So from a mental health perspective, I'd say like there have been battles. I mean, I still have pretty bad ADD. I take my breaks every day, right, to hopefully stay a little bit more focused than I would be. I have in the past, been medicated for depression and other things, but in the long run, I find that the best bet from almost all of these issues is to maintain a healthy sleep schedule, maintain a regular, bout of exercise a couple times a week. Hopefully some weightlifting, hopefully some cardio, hopefully some stretching or yoga or the rest. And then finding all of these little opportunities, I guess, throughout the week or, throughout the day even to kind of inject some mindfulness or meditation or breathing or whatever, which I think if you had told me this 10 years ago, I would have just laughed you out of the room.
Right.
Like, there's no way I would have taken that seriously. Right. But I know that from my own experience that I'm just overall much happier and much healthier when I'm doing these things. And it's sometimes only like a couple minutes of work a day, then it pays huge dividends. So for anyone that's interested, I'm happy to share more of those details, obviously, if you want to reach out, but it's, do what's right for you. And back to the idea of sampling widely, it won't be the same for everyone.
Right.
Try and find something because it can just make such a difference.
Definitely. It's, I mean, and I appreciate you telling your story on the podcast. It's something that's super heavy, but it's lovely to see that somebody has been able to, grow from that. And though they have bumps in the road, they can still succeed and do the things that they want to do and travel and overland and do all of that sort of thing. Even though you have, the health history, mental health history, whatever you want to call it. Yeah. It's funny you say the sleep thing. It's one of those things where anytime you talk to a doctor, in my experience, anytime you talk to a doctor, psychiatrist, therapist, whatever, first question they always ask is, how's your sleep? And it seems like such a small question, but I remember during times whenever I was not doing well or anything like that, sleep was always shit. It was always just bad. I was either not sleeping through the night or going to bed late or waking up early, whatever it may be. And it's funny that was one of the first things that came out of your mouth. It's like, make sure you're sleeping. And it seems like such a simple task.
It was the same thing. So when I get rushed into the ER, I'm trying to figure out where I am. I'm sort of coming back to my senses and figuring out what's going on. And really the main quote unquote prescription that I got from the doctor that day was, going forward, you get 8 hours of sleep every day, period. Yeah. It makes no difference what's going on in your life. It cannot possibly be more important than this. And it's such a great reminder of, if it's late and you want to watch one more episode of whatever that show is you're binge watching, you can watch one more, but you still got to get your 8 hours of sleep. So if you got something you got to do in the morning, you're trying to get to the gym before work, you got to drop the kids off at school, something's due for work that's a little bit early or whatever it is, there's no way to steal from sleep, right? You still need your 8 hours, and you're going to put the work in either way.
Absolutely, absolutely. It's funny too. Whenever we were visiting whenever you were in town, you mentioned your travel schedule and how you form it around sleep, basically, and around like
I do.
yeah.
I probably sound like a complete lunatic for those that are less interested in the sleep component, but I can tell you that my driving days, I've had a couple of days, and again, like it's all relative, right? There are folks certainly that are driving further, and there are folks that are not able to drive.
Of course, there always is. Yeah.
But I've had my fair share of days that are in that 800, 900,000, or even 11 or 1,200 miles in a day, and really, for me, it's such a simple one because I can drive as long as I can, but I know at the end when I'm going to get off the road, it's going to be half an hour or so from when I get out of the car to when I'm asleep. And I got 8 hours of sleep at least, and then probably about a half an hour or so to pack the stuff up, get back in the car, get on the road. So the whole schedule is around, it's 9 hours off the road, and it's, the rest of the time is spent moving, and you just try and be as efficient as you can be, right? So I'm very, very rarely pushing past, the whatever it is, 15 hours or so of driving a day, because I need my 8 hours, right?
Right.
So the only reason I would ever do that is that I'm now within the extra, whatever it is, 100, 200, 300 miles of where I'm going. And so you take a slightly longer driving day. But in reality, it's such a simple routine for me, because it's like you hit the road in the morning. It could be 4 a.m., 5 a.m. or something. You're on the road until you're done for the day, clock out, get your 8 hours of sleep, and then you're back on the road again for the next one. But and I think it's a good reminder for just road safety in general, right? It's like you gotta take care of yourself if you're going to be pushing it, particularly solo, in places you haven't been before and places you're less familiar with, and you might be doing it. I mean, driving for that long during a blizzard or through bad weather or whatever else, it's very tiring. You got to take care.
Through a mountain pass or anything like that. Even sometimes, honestly, a lot of the most challenging road is whenever it's those long and straight for hours on end, because it's so easy just to.
I'll tell you, Mark, on that last road trip when I connected with you, my most challenging day was coming into New Orleans during Mardi Gras, right?
Yeah.
That was a huge mistake, right? Mr. Tango made a mistake on the itinerary for that one, right? Because it's one thing to be doing that, sitting in crazy traffic and all the rest when you're, well rested and feeling good. But at the end of 1,000-mile driving day, the last thing you need is, 2 hours or something to go the last 3 miles, right? So that was a mistake.
I can't think of anything more infuriating, honestly.
Totally mad, right? And the giant Land Cruiser, lurking through the streets, got a lot of looks from the party goers, but it was an interesting place to be at the time. So I appreciated the stop.
Yeah, that's funny. So you touched a little bit on, you eating right, sleeping well, and making sure you're hitting the gym. Are there any like little coping mechanisms that you use throughout the day that things that you just know you have to do to make sure that you're there mentally and that you don't fall off the wagon per se?
Yeah, so I'm very regimented with my water and caffeine. That's another one that I think is, people are always talking about, it's important to stay hydrated, right? But as a function of some of the medications that I'm on for, both for ADD, and the more pressing ones, of course, the ones to prevent any further seizures,
right?
It's really important to stay hydrated. And I know for myself, like if I don't get enough water on a given day, I'm gonna feel really, really poor, right?
Yeah.
So that one that's easy. Like, first thing I do when I get up, I'm starting with water. The last thing I'm doing before the end of the day is, more water. My coffee, I have my coffee. And the big thing for that is the caffeine, right? So have the caffeine at the same time every day so that you're on a rhythm. You don't have your, my caffeine headache and all the rest is very real if I don't have my coffee. So those are tiny ones. But I would say like the things that have really helped me in the last couple of years, and this is a pandemic era, introduction for me. I tried to, at least over the winter, I was doing it more easily because I could do it outside, but some cold water plunges, right? And it sounds, I know it's super cliched, and there's a ton of people that are talking about all the crazy benefits of this stuff. I'm not sure I believe all of it, but I can tell you that from my limited time, spending a couple minutes in some very, very cold water, as unfun as that sounds, again, pays dividends. And it's great for, at least for me, there's a huge mental boost afterwards in terms of feeling much better.
Yeah.
Great for circulation. It's great for, as you probably know, we spend a ton of time lifting heavy at the gym, does wonders for reducing soreness and all the rest.
Yeah.
I did also download, not to, plug a bunch of apps, but the Headspace app for me has been great. I try and
I've heard so much about that app, so many good things that I need to check it out.
It is such a simple thing. And I think I was also reluctant in the past to buy into some of it, because I was kind of like, this can't possibly work. I'm going to listen to some guy telling me how to take deep breaths for 5 minutes. There's just no way that's going to improve anything.
Right.
And the reality is that it does, because the funny thing is the cold water experience is a good reminder of when your body is in shock and you're coping with something that's either painful or uncomfortable or whatever else. I go right back to exactly the same breathing stuff you do during one of those mindfulness exercises, which is such an interesting point.
It's super interesting you say that, because for a lot of people with depression, anxiety, trauma, PTSD, anything like that, a lot of it has to do with your fight or flight response. Putting yourself into the situations of, like, for me, I don't have a cold plunge, and I do it every once in a while if I'm like super sore or something, but I'm a big sauna guy. So probably 3 or 4 days a week after I lift, then I go and sit in the sauna for 15, 20 minutes. But it's the same science as the cold plunge of it triggers that fight or flight response. You have to sit in it, and that creates kind of a dopamine hit. And it's the same breathing exercises as well of, man, you got to sit there and tough it out. And the only way you're going to be able to do that is if you can control your mind and can control your breathing. And that's what helps you get through. And it's cool to see, for me, how that translates for if I'm having a super tough day with anxiety or depression or whatever it may be. If I can hone into, man, just breathe and control your breathing and control your body, then it almost feels, makes things feel easy. And
I totally agree. It's the first, if you can control your breath and you're able to get your mind, sort of back centered and focus on the task in front of you, it's what you can do. If that's the beginning for me for all great things, right? So I'm sitting there in some freezing cold water. I'll tell you, like, I'll give you paint the picture for you of having bought some giant horse troughs, right? Tractor Supply, right? I had these things sitting out in the backyard at my mom's house. I live in the city, so I don't have space, unfortunately, here, but out with family in the burbs. And these things, they got filled up with a hose before winter came. As soon as the winter rolled around, these things, they got a couple inches of ice on them now, because we're in New England.
Yeah.
You get the shovel out or whatever else, break up the ice, and you hop in there, and it's very cold, right? And you want to get out. You want to get out immediately.
Right. Your whole body is telling you need to get out of here.
Yeah, like, I would assume a simple survival thing, right? Like on a long enough timeline, it's probably not great to be sitting, for hours, days at a time in these things. But the first 15, 30 seconds, whatever it is, if you can just settle your breath, you'll be totally fine. Honestly, totally fine. And it's such a fascinating thing to see, as others in my family and those that I keep, suggesting, hey, you should try this. Like they build up the tolerance really by realizing that they have complete control over it, right? It's not about just sitting there and suffering. You just have to realize that you can, turn back to your breath, turn back to your mental state, really. And then the rest is largely, at least in my experience, external to you, right?
Oh, absolutely.
It really won't hurt you once you decide that it won't.
Right. And it translates to so many things too, with whether it's running or weightlifting or anything like that. It's all about control and mind-body connection and breath and whatnot. It kind of translates across all different things. And like you said, if you could do something hard to either start or end your day, like, it just kind of makes things seem easier throughout your life. And
there is I'm blanking on the name of the book. I think it's probably 7 Habits or one of those classics, but it's this idea of the daily victory, right? Or the daily win, right?
Right.
And for me, if I can start my day going to the gym before work, if I can start my day getting in some really important reading that I wanted to do, that's, probably not work related, but something that I wanted to, check off. I'm constantly reading. So that's a thing for me, that if I'm able to get that done, that I feel really good about that. Same with being able to connect with important people that are perhaps, in different time zones or wherever else. Like sometimes those quiet morning hours can be great for that. Definitely. If I'm able to accomplish any of those things really early, right? And you set the alarm, as with all things, you get up when the alarm goes off and you get your stuff done that you need to get done. The whole day has been set in a much better way, right?
Oh, definitely.
Great about everything else that you have to encounter, because you've already had your, one small daily victory. So I totally agree with you. It's all about how you start your day.
Absolutely. It's crazy how, whenever you start to talk about it, whenever you're in a negative mind space or a bad mind space, everything seems like a huge mountain to climb. But whenever you lay it out on paper, it's like, oh man, all I got to do is like breathe well and sleep well, and maybe do one thing hard a day. It's like, well, yeah, that's kind of
that's it. Yeah,
that's
that's the
life.
secret. I would say, a couple other things, and we'll draw the photography analogy because I think it's worthwhile. One is this idea of like, you're going to have the opportunity to view things through a different lens, right?
Yeah.
And you have to be able to have this ability to kind of zoom in or zoom out on your situation. It's very, very easy to see a tiny inconvenience or whatever else as the end of the world. And the truth is, if you decide that it will have a huge negative impact on you. If you're able though to say, okay, I'm going to zoom out from the situation ever so slightly, right? And I'm going to see that this tiny thing is just that. It's one tiny inconvenience across a day that was otherwise fantastic. This is great, right? Like then it's that perspective that you need, I think, to stay focused. But you can do the same across time as well, right? So it's kind of this idea of, I had 5 seconds or something where something didn't go my way, but in the 5 days or something before that, in general, I've gotten all the stuff done I needed to. My loved ones are happy and healthy, and they're taken care of. I'm getting, all the critical things done that I need to. These 5 seconds are just a reminder of, frankly, how well everything else is going.
Right.
So
and I
would always say, try and zoom out somehow if you can,
I can't remember. It was going around on Instagram a while ago, but it's like there's I don't know how many minutes there are in a day. I'm not good at math, but there's 80,000 minutes in a day, right? Imagine that's $80,000. If somebody took $3 from you out of that 80,000, you wouldn't throw away that other 79,997. You're still going to take that and do something cool with it. Don't let 3 minutes or whatever F up your day. And it's something, again, when you're close to the fire and you're down and you're in a pickle and you're in a rut, it's hard to see that. But the little steps, and the Miss Jennifer O'Neill, who was on our podcast last week, she said the same thing. It's just the little steps. If you can take little steps forward every single day and have actionable steps, then you will make progress. And soon big goals will seem like little goals, and unreachable goals will feel like very attainable goals. So,
I mean, it's the extra 30 seconds in the freezing cold water. It's the extra minute in the sauna. It's that one extra rep that you weren't sure you could get last week, but is there now. It's amazing. We always, from my perspective, underestimate our ability to advance and progress and do better. Oh, and that's actually one thing I will say is probably this idea of journaling has been really powerful for me, because it's being able to go back to particularly see in your own handwriting, in your own words,
right,
how you felt about a certain challenge you had. So I think my journaling probably started also early pandemic days. And so I can go back a couple of years and see exactly on this day how I felt, a couple years ago. And it's so humbling to see, how much progress I've made on certain things. And it doesn't matter what your goal is, really. It could be health, could be, financial, could be personal, whatever it is. But if you look at those things and say, okay, here's the challenge that I had on this day, and here's how I handled it. And I'm so thrilled at the progress I've made, and my ability, for instance, to handle exactly the same issue now with really no thought at all, right? I could overcome that today with no second thought, right?
Absolutely. It's all about the experience of it. I mean, if you've experienced it, you've gone through the hard thing. Now that hard thing is, oh, well, I already did it. So what's it to do it again? The journaling thing is one that I need to get back to, and I've talked about doing it, but it's so interesting because I found a journal from a while back, and I was reading again some of the things that you're talking about, like some of the issues I was going through in my head at the time. And I look back, I'm like, oh, that was like simple. Yeah. Like it was right in front of me, and it was so simple. But now, it seems like just a little small bump in the road. And I'm sure, and it goes to show, like the things that I think I'm dealing with today that are really difficult, in a year, 2 years, 3 years are going to be small things. They're nothing to worry about.
Yeah, that's what I've always found. I mean, to that, same kind of general idea, there's always this part of me that wants to do deeds today that are, kind of in service or on behalf of my future self. That's one thing I always think about. What work would I wish I had done today if I look, say 20 years into the future? What's Charlie Tango in 20 years really hoping that this version of himself got done, right? But balance that with also this idea of, as a child, I had all kinds of aspirations, right? You have these ideas about how your life will turn out or things you want to get done. If you can make, the younger version of yourself happy, you've mentioned the concept yourself a couple of times. Like what would young, Pat want, right?
Absolutely.
And it's not just to snorkel on the Land Cruiser, obviously. It's a good
Right.
start. There are
Right.
other things.
That was the only thing you wanted, honestly. Not
That's
that
simple things, right? But
Right.
if you can do those acts of service really, to benefit the dreams you had as a younger person, and then of course also in benefit of your future self, I think you're going to be in great shape. Honestly,
I think so too. It's so hard to, and for me having a kid and another one on the way, it's like it dumbs things down for me because it's like I'm worried about this financial goal or whatever it may be. And if I asked 7-year-old or 8-year-old Patrick, like, if you could look up 15, 20, 30 years from now, what would you be proud of him for? It's like, oh, dude, that dude has a car and a house and a wife. What? Like, that's super fucking cool. And same with like my son, like the things that my son thinks are cool that I do have nothing to do with,
it's very humbling, I'm sure.
Absolutely. He thinks it's cool that I can throw him on the bed and that I spend time with him. He doesn't think it's cool that I bought a new set of lights for the Land Cruiser. He's like, all right, whatever. He does like the Land Cruiser, but he could care less about the
great taste, but it is a good reminder of what's important. I think it's probably one of my favorite things about spending time with, either younger siblings, relatives, family members, whatever else. They've got a similar perspective as far as having potentially grown up in a similar environment or have a sense of, but even in that environment, the things you choose to focus on are just so important. It's so important to focus on the stuff that, back to your point of like, if you can control this thing, certainly you can direct energy towards it. If there are things you can't control, don't spend a ton of time on that, obviously, right? But also don't get too caught up in back to the Land Cruiser analogy of it's really about the journey, of course, right? It's about spending time in nature, spending time with friends, spending time for me practicing the photography and whatever else. It's way less important, what size tires you're running in order to get there, right?
Right. The Rock doesn't care if you're on 33s or 35s. It just doesn't really care. Awesome, man. Well, Chris, I appreciate you coming on the podcast today, man. Like I said, I've been looking forward to this for a long time, and I'd love to have you on as a regular guest because it's always just a pleasure to talk to you. And go ahead, plug away. I mean, is there anything, Charlie Don't Dance Tango on Instagram, anything else that the people should be looking out for?
I think we might consider trying to find a second time for a follow-up conversation because I feel like we're scratching the surface. But
I know.
I look forward to doing it again.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Well, Chris, thanks again. And thank you everybody for listening, and be on the lookout for next week's episode. Looking forward to talking to you all then. Thanks, guys. Bye.
Hello, it is Ryan, and I was on a flight the other day playing one of my favorite social spin slot games on ChumbaCasino.com. I looked over at the person sitting next to me, and you know what they were doing? They were also playing Chumba Casino. Coincidence? I think not. Everybody's loving having fun with it. Chumba Casino is home to hundreds of casino-style games that you can play for free anytime, anywhere, even at 30,000 feet. So sign up now at ChumbaCasino.com to claim your free welcome bonus. That's ChumbaCasino.com and live the Chumba life.
No purchase necessary. VGW Group. Void where prohibited by law. See terms and conditions. 18+.